A cowboy froze at the depot. The mail-order bride was the girl he'd loved for 18 years. John McAllister was a man shaped by the wide, open plains of Wyoming. From the time he could walk, he had been around horses, cattle, and endless fields of dry grass that rippled under the wind like an ocean of gold. By his early 30s, John had grown tall and strong, with hands calloused from years of work and a face weathered by the sun and wind. He was a cowboy through and through, quiet, careful, and steady, but he carried a part of his heart that had never grown hard. That part of his heart belonged to a memory, a girl he had known when he was 18, back in Nebraska. Her name was Clara Thompson. She had been bright and full of laughter, with hair that shone in the sunlight and eyes that seemed to notice everything. John had been shy around her then, unsure of how to express the feelings he had, but over the years, he had come to realize that she was the first person he had ever truly loved. When Clara's family moved west, farther than he could follow, their letters had kept the bond alive. They had written carefully, each word carrying the weight of their separate lives. John remembered opening her letters by candlelight, reading every line twice, and storing them in a small wooden box under his bed. He had dreamed of the day they would see each other again, but as years passed, the letters became fewer, and then there were none. Life had a way of moving forward, but John's memory of Clara stayed frozen in time. Now, years later, he lived a life of solitude, riding his horse across the ranch, tending cattle and fixing fences from dawn to dusk. His days were filled with work, but his evenings were quiet, long, and sometimes lonely. The vastness of the plains had a beauty that few people understood, but it could also feel like a prison if you were alone. John had gotten used to it, though, because he had his routines, his animals, and his thoughts of Clara. He often found himself thinking of what she was doing, wondering if she remembered the boy next door, the one who had always been too shy to tell her the truth. One chilly February morning, a letter arrived at the small post office near his ranch. John had been riding his horse through the snowy trails when the postmaster handed it to him. It was unusual for mail to arrive this late in winter, and the envelope was thicker than most. Inside, he found a letter that made his heart skip a beat. It was from the intermediary he had contacted months ago, arranging for a mail-order bride. The letter explained that the young woman he had requested would arrive at the nearest train depot within the week. John had requested someone kind, strong, and used to rural life. He had thought about many possibilities, but the moment he saw her stepping off the train, he would know. That morning, as John rode back to the ranch, the cold air bit at his face, but he barely noticed. His mind was racing, filled with a mixture of hope, fear, and excitement. He wondered what she would be like, whether she would be quiet or talkative, shy or bold. He tried to imagine how it would feel to finally meet her, but the truth was he could not. It had been so many years since he had last seen Clara, and yet he felt as if she were only a day away from him, as if time had not touched her. At the ranch, he fed the horses and checked on the cattle, but his usual calm focus was gone. Each sound, the clatter of the barn doors, the soft lowing of the cattle, the whistling wind, seemed louder, sharper. Even the familiar tasks that normally comforted him felt strange. By late afternoon, he had made a decision. He would go to the depot a day early. He could not wait another moment. The depot was small and lonely, surrounded by snow-covered fields. Its wooden platform was slick with frost, and the roof was dusted with a thin layer of ice. John arrived as the sun was just beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. He tied his horse near the edge of the platform, patting its neck gently, though his mind was elsewhere. The wind carried the sound of distant crows and the faint whistle of a train, though none was yet in sight. He walked back and forth along the platform, adjusting his hat, brushing snow off his coat, and trying to calm his racing heart. Memories of Clara came unbidden. He remembered the way she used to laugh when he tried to ride her brother's pony, the way she would hum softly while working in the garden, and the way her eyes seemed to sparkle when she talked about books or animals. He remembered the letters, the carefully chosen words that had carried her thoughts across miles and years. And he remembered his own words he never sent, words of love he had kept in his chest because he had been too afraid. As night fell, the platform grew colder. John wrapped his coat tighter and lit a small lantern he had brought with him. The warm glow did little to chase away the chill, but it made him feel less alone. He checked the tracks, looking for the glimmer of the train's lights in the distance. He imagined Clara stepping off the train, imagining her expression, her posture, the first words she would say. His heart pounded so loudly he feared she would hear it from miles away. Sleep did not come easily that night. John sat in the waiting room, watching the shadows shift across the walls, thinking of every possible scenario. Would she recognize him immediately? Would she be disappointed in the man he had become? What if she had changed so much that the boy she once knew was gone? The questions circled endlessly in his mind, but beneath them all was a quiet certainty. No matter what, he wanted to see her, to know her, to finally hold the years of longing in his hands. Morning came with a sharp, cold light. Frost clung to the wooden beams and the snow sparkled as the sun touched it. John paced the platform again, listening for the whistle that would announce the train. His nerves were taut. He could feel every small movement, every sound, every breath. Then in the distance, a thin ribbon of smoke appeared on the horizon, and the distant whistle of the train cut across the plains. John felt a strange mixture of fear and joy. The train was coming, and with it, the moment he had waited for all his adult life. His hand trembled slightly as he adjusted his coat and gripped the reins of his horse. He could hear the faint sound of wheels on rails, growing louder with each passing second. His heart raced. The memory of the girl he had loved, the one who had haunted his thoughts for nearly 2 decades, filled every corner of his mind. When the train finally arrived, hissing and clanging as it slowed, John's stomach twisted. He watched the doors open, and women began to step down onto the platform, some with confidence, some with shyness, all carrying trunks and shawls. He kept his eyes fixed ahead, scanning each face, yet he was unprepared for what he saw. And then he froze. Among the women he saw her, Clara. She looked older, more grown-up, but it was unmistakable. Her hair fell the same way, her eyes still held that spark, and the very presence she carried made the world feel suddenly smaller, brighter, and impossibly real. For a moment John could not move. He stood still, his horse shifting nervously beside him, the cold wind blowing around him, and all he could do was stare. The years melted away. The distance, the letters, the hardships, they all seemed to vanish in that instant. He felt an emotion so powerful that it left him speechless. She looked up and their eyes met. Recognition, surprise, joy, and something deeper passed between them silently. For 18 years, John had imagined this moment in countless ways, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of it. The train whistle faded, the other women moved on, and for John, the world narrowed to the figure of Clara standing there looking at him. He realized then that he had been waiting for this, not a mail order bride, not a new beginning, not just a companion, but for her. And now she was here. For a long while, John did not speak. He just stood there, frozen by the weight of the moment, the wind whipping around him, the plains stretching endlessly behind him, and Clara standing just a few feet away. In that silence, he knew that everything had changed, that the life he had imagined for himself alone was about to be rewritten by her presence, by the return of the girl he had loved for 18 years. The train had finally come to a full stop, hissing and groaning as steam escaped into the cold morning air. The wooden platform creaked under the weight of travelers stepping down, trunks bumping against the boards, boots scraping the frost. John McAllister stood tense, gripping the reins of his horse, feeling as if every sound had grown louder, every breath heavier. His heart beat like a drum in his chest, and the air itself seemed electric, charged with anticipation. He kept his eyes trained on the edge of the platform, scanning each face. Some women hurried past, their eyes downcast, clearly uncomfortable with the unfamiliar surroundings. Others looked around confidently, surveying the depot with curiosity and quiet excitement. Each face seemed to tell a story, a life lived far from the vast empty plains of Wyoming, lives filled with cities, towns, or other families. And then he saw her, Clara. She stepped down with careful, deliberate movements, her hands holding the edges of a worn shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Her trunk trailed behind her, handled with care, as if it contained everything she had brought to start a new life. She looked around the platform, her eyes scanning the scene with curiosity and a hint of nervousness. And then, finally, their eyes met. For a moment, the world disappeared. The steam from the train swirled between them, but John could see only her. The 18 years of longing, of memories written on yellowed letters, of quiet nights thinking of her, all rushed back in a single, overwhelming wave. Clara's eyes widened, and recognition flashed across her face. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. John felt his own throat tighten, unsure if he could speak either. He had imagined this moment countless times. He had pictured her smiling, perhaps laughing, maybe even looking surprised. But nothing in his imagination had prepared him for the reality. She was real, standing there in front of him, the woman he had loved since he was 18, and she was even more alive than his memories. Slowly, as if moving through a dream, John stepped closer. His horse shifted nervously beneath him, sensing the tension in its rider. Clara's eyes never left his. There was a flicker of recognition, a spark that made his chest ache with emotion. He tried to speak, to say something, anything, but the words got caught in his throat. All he could do was stand there, frozen for a moment longer, feeling the weight of years melt away in her gaze. Finally, she spoke. "John!" Her voice was soft, hesitant, but it carried across the frosty air like a warm breeze. "Yes," he managed, his own voice rough and uncertain. "Clara," a small, nervous smile appeared on her face. It was the same smile he had remembered from his youth, the smile that had stayed in his dreams for all those years. He wanted to reach out to take her hand, but something inside him held him back. He was afraid. Afraid that this was a dream that might vanish, afraid that she might not feel the same way after all these years. Clara, too, hesitated. She took a careful step forward, then another, closing the small distance between them. Her eyes studied his face, taking in the lines and the ruggedness that the years had added. There was recognition there, but also a subtle question, a quiet wonder about who he had become. I can't believe it's really you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "After all this time," John nodded, swallowing hard. "I know, I thought I'd never see you again, not like this." The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of the train's steam, the creak of the platform, and the distant cry of a crow. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a bridge over 18 years of separation. Each of them felt the weight of the past, the letters exchanged, the longing, and the quiet hope that had never completely died. Clara shifted her trunk slightly, setting it down carefully. She looked around, then back at John. "I wasn't sure, I didn't know if you'd even remember me," she admitted, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "I've remembered you every day," John said softly, "every single day." Her eyes widened, and for a moment she seemed to lose her breath. The words hung between them, fragile and powerful. They were no longer just a boy and a girl who had shared a neighborhood. They were two people who had carried the memory of each other through years of change, through distance and time. The train platform began to empty slowly. Other travelers moved on, their conversations and footsteps fading into the cold air. John and Clara remained, standing in a bubble of stillness, wrapped in the weight of the moment. He finally reached out a hand, uncertain, trembling slightly. Clara looked at it, then placed her hand in his. The contact was gentle, tentative, but it carried all the emotions neither of them had dared to speak aloud. "Shall we go?" John asked finally, his voice low and steady, though his heart raced. Clara nodded. "Yes." They walked together to John's horse, her hand still in his. She marveled at the open plains stretching in every direction, the endless sky above, and the quiet beauty of the land. It was unlike anything she had ever known. "It's beautiful here," she said, her voice soft, almost in awe. "It is," John agreed, "but it can be lonely too." "I can see that," she replied, glancing at him with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "But maybe it's the kind of loneliness that makes meeting someone again feel even more important." John smiled faintly, touched by her insight. He swung onto his horse, helping her onto the saddle behind him. Her arms instinctively wrapped around his waist, and he felt the warmth of her body against him. It was a strange mix of familiarity and newness, the closeness of a girl he had known as a child, and the presence of a woman he was only beginning to truly know. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, filled with small moments of shared observation. Clara pointed out the distant hills, the frozen streams, and the patterns the snow made on the fields. John answered her questions patiently, telling her about the cattle, the horses, and the routines of ranch life. He tried not to rush the conversation, letting the silence between them be comfortable, not awkward. As they neared the ranch, Clara noticed the old wooden fences, the barn, and the small cabin that John called home. "It's simple," she said, "but it feels real, honest." "That's the best kind of place," John said. "There's no pretense here, what you see is what you get." Clara smiled, leaning slightly against him as they rode. There was a sense of ease beginning to grow between them, a feeling that despite the years apart, they could still connect, still understand each other. She felt the trust and familiarity that had been planted long ago, and John felt the same relief that she was here, really here, and not just a memory. When they arrived at the ranch, John helped Clara down from the horse. She set her trunk down carefully, brushing the snow from her coat. They stepped inside the small cabin, the warmth from the fireplace immediately enveloping them. The smell of burning wood and the cozy glow of the fire made the room feel safe and intimate. Clara looked around, taking in the modest furnishings, the simple table and chairs, and the small collection of books and letters that John had kept. "You live very quietly," she said, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "I like it that way," John replied. "Quiet gives you time to think, time to remember, time to hope." Her gaze softened and she took a deep breath. "I think I've hoped for this too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. John felt his chest tighten. The words confirmed everything he had felt for years, the bond that had survived distance and time. He realized then that their connection was stronger than he had dared to imagine. This was not just a meeting, it was a reunion, a second chance at something they had both carried quietly in their hearts. The day passed slowly. They shared a simple meal, exchanged stories about the years they had spent apart, and laughed at small memories from their youth. John showed Clara the barn, the fields, and the animals, explaining the work that went into the ranch. She listened attentively, asking questions and offering her thoughts, showing an eagerness to understand the life he had built. By evening, a gentle peace had settled over them. Clara sat near the fire, warming her hands, while John tended to the horses outside. When he returned, she looked up and smiled, a small, shy smile that made his heart swell. They did not speak of the future yet. For now, it was enough to be together, to know that after 18 years they had found each other again. As night fell, the stars came out in full brilliance. The sky stretched endlessly above the plains, a vast canopy of light. John and Clara stepped outside briefly, standing side by side in silence, feeling the cold wind against their faces and the warmth of each other's presence. Words were unnecessary. In that quiet, in that moment, they knew that this was only the beginning. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, John felt a sense of completeness. The waiting, the longing, the years of imagining this moment, they were over. Clara was here and they could start again. Not as a boy and girl separated by time, but as 2 adults, ready to face whatever the future might bring together. The days after Clara's arrival passed slowly at first, each one carrying a mix of excitement, uncertainty, and quiet wonder. John McAllister had known life on the plains could be harsh, but he had never imagined how delicate and fragile a reunion could feel. Every morning, he woke before sunrise to tend the cattle, feed the horses, and check the fences. The cold air was sharp, cutting across the open fields, yet he found himself looking forward to the small comfort of knowing Clara was nearby. Clara, too, was adjusting. The wide plains were a different world from the towns and villages she had known. Snow covered the ground in uneven patches, wind whipped across the fields, and the silence was almost complete except for the distant cry of a hawk or the lowing of cattle. At first, she had felt unsure, even afraid, but John's quiet steadiness gave her confidence. He taught her how to handle the horses, how to feed the animals, and how to manage the small routines that kept the ranch alive. Despite the work, the true challenge was the silence between them. They had spent so many years apart that neither knew how to speak freely of the feelings that had lingered for nearly 2 decades. Every word had weight, every glance carried memory. At night, after the work was done and the fire burned low in the cabin, they would sit quietly, side by side, feeling the closeness but saying nothing. The air between them was filled with things unspoken: hope, longing, fear, and the tentative excitement of discovering each other again. One evening, after a long day of fixing a broken fence along the northern pasture, Clara leaned against the wooden rails, brushing snow from her coat. "You've done a lot here," she said softly, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. "I didn't realize how much work it takes to run a ranch alone." John paused, resting his hands on the rail beside hers. "It's hard," he admitted. "Some days are long and some nights are colder than you'd ever imagine, but it's honest work. It's the kind of life that keeps you grounded." Clara looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time since they had reunited, she allowed herself to see the man he had become. He was not the shy boy she had known. He was strong, capable, and steady, yet he carried the same gentle soul she had loved so long ago. She felt her heart swell with something she hadn't expected, comfort, admiration, and a quiet relief that he had become the man she had hoped he would be. "You've changed," she said quietly. John smiled faintly. "I've had to. Life out here doesn't leave room for much else." "But you're still the same," Clara replied, her voice almost a whisper. "I can see it in your eyes. The boy I knew, he's still here under all of this." He looked down at her, feeling a rush of emotion he could barely contain. "I've never stopped thinking about you," he admitted. "Not for a single day. You are part of me even now." Her eyes glistened. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "I never stopped thinking about you either," she said. "Even when life took us in different directions, even when the letters stopped, I carried you with me, always." For a moment, the cold wind and the snow seemed to disappear. There was only the two of them, standing in the quiet expanse of the plains, feeling a connection that had never truly broken. Words were unnecessary after that. The silence between them was filled with understanding, trust, and the weight of years spent apart. The next few days brought more routine but also deeper understanding. They worked side by side in the barn, mending fences, feeding the horses, and tending to the cattle. Clara learned quickly, her hands growing calloused alongside John's. They shared small jokes, laughed at clumsy moments, and began to build a rhythm together. The tasks that had seemed so daunting to Clara at first became opportunities to connect, to see the man she loved in action, and to discover new parts of herself in this unfamiliar but growingly familiar life. One afternoon, John decided to show Clara a secret spot he had discovered years ago, a small stream that wound through a grove of cottonwood trees. The ice had begun to melt along the edges, and the sun glinted off the water in bright, dancing patterns. Clara gasped at the beauty, stepping carefully over the slick rocks. "This is magical," she whispered, turning to him with wide eyes. John chuckled softly. "I come here when I need to think, when the work and the wind get too heavy. It's quiet, safe." Clara reached out to touch the water, letting it run over her fingers. "It feels alive," she said, smiling, "like it's waiting for someone to notice it." John watched her, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. "I wanted to share it with you," he said. "Because some things are too special to keep to yourself." She looked up at him, and in that moment the years apart seemed less important. They had spent so long separated by distance, yet here they were together, sharing something as simple and perfect as a quiet stream in the middle of nowhere. That evening they returned to the cabin, tired but happy. Clara helped prepare a small meal over the stove, while John stacked firewood and tidied the cabin. The warmth of the fire, the smell of cooking, and the soft glow of the lamp made the space feel like a sanctuary. They ate together, sharing stories of their separate lives, the struggles, the joys, and the little things that had shaped them over the years. Clara spoke of her journey to Wyoming, the towns she had passed through, the people she had met along the way. John listened intently, asking questions, remembering the girl who had once walked beside him in Nebraska. Each story revealed a little more about the person she had become, and John felt the connection between them deepen. After dinner, they sat by the fire in silence. Clara looked into the flames, thinking of the life that had led her here to this small cabin, to the man she had loved since she was a teenager. John watched her quietly, feeling a mixture of admiration, relief, and longing. It was a quiet, unspoken understanding that they were no longer children, yet the love between them had endured. Over the next few weeks, their bond grew stronger. Clara adapted to ranch life with remarkable ease. She learned to ride with confidence, care for the animals, and handle the chores alongside John. The work was demanding, but it gave them opportunities to talk, to laugh, and to build trust. They discovered that despite the years apart, their minds and hearts still spoke the same language. One particularly cold evening, a snowstorm began to sweep across the plains. The wind howled, rattling the cabin and bending the trees outside. John and Clara huddled by the fire, wrapped in blankets, the storm making the cabin feel both small and safe. Clara looked at John, her eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper. "I'm glad I came here," she said softly. "Even with the cold, even with the hard work, I've never felt more at home." John reached out, taking her hand gently. "I'm glad too," he said. "It was worth the wait, every single day." The storm raged outside, but inside they found warmth in each other's presence. They spoke of hopes for the future, of small dreams and possibilities. The years of separation had taught them patience, resilience, and the importance of trust. And now they were learning to rebuild a life together, slowly, carefully, and with attention to the smallest details. One evening, John brought out an old box of letters he had kept all these years, the letters that had once carried Clara's words across time and distance. He handed them to her, watching as her hands trembled slightly while she opened the first envelope. These are all the letters I ever sent," he said quietly. "I never threw any away. Every word you wrote, I kept them all." Clara's eyes filled with tears as she read the first few letters. She laughed softly at some passages, smiled at others, and occasionally paused, brushing her fingers over the faded ink. "I can't believe you kept them," she whispered. "After all these years?" John nodded. "Of course I did. They were a part of you, a part of us." They spent the evening reading the letters together, reliving memories, sharing laughter, and sometimes pausing in silence to let the weight of their past and present sink in. By the end of the night, they had rediscovered not just the love they had once felt, but the deeper understanding that comes from enduring separation, learning patience, and waiting for the right moment. Through shared work, quiet moments, and the rekindling of old memories, John and Clara began to understand each other in ways that went beyond words. They realized that love was not just a feeling from the past. It was a living, growing force that could survive time, distance, and life's challenges. By the time spring approached, the snow melted, and the ranch began to green, they had built a rhythm together, a bond forged not just in memory but in daily life. Their relationship had grown beyond reunion. It had become partnership, friendship, and love in its most enduring form. Spring arrived slowly on the Wyoming plains. The snow that had blanketed the fields for months began to melt, revealing green grass and tiny wildflowers peeking through the thawing soil. The air was still sharp in the mornings, but the sun grew warmer by midday, and the ranch seemed to breathe a little easier with the changing season. For John McAllister and Clara, it felt like a new beginning, not just in nature, but in life. Clara had grown accustomed to the rhythms of the ranch. She could saddle a horse with ease, mend fences without help, and even guide the younger animals with a quiet confidence that made John proud. She had adapted quickly, but more importantly, she had become part of the rhythm of his days. Her presence had brought warmth and laughter into the cabin and the fields alike. No longer was the ranch just a place of work and solitude. It had become a home filled with life and shared purpose. John watched her one morning as she tended the small vegetable garden they had planted together. She knelt in the soil, her hands moving gently but with determination, and he noticed how much she had grown, not just in strength but in confidence. Her hair caught the sunlight as she worked, and he realized again how lucky he was. 18 years of longing, letters, and separation had led to this moment. She was real, she was here, and she was his. "John," Clara called softly, standing and brushing dirt from her hands. "Come see this." He walked over, curious. She pointed to a small patch of soil where the first sprouts of carrots had broken through the earth. Tiny green shoots reached upward, delicate but resilient. John smiled. "Looks like life is starting again," he said. "It's the small things, isn't it?" "Yes," Clara agreed. "Even the smallest signs feel like hope after a long winter." It was a quiet moment, but one that carried the weight of everything they had endured. The years of separation, the uncertainty, and the longing all made the simplicity of life together feel extraordinary. They had learned that love was not only about grand gestures, but also about shared work, quiet support, and moments of understanding that passed between glances and touches. As the days grew warmer, they began planning for the future together. John showed Clara the north pasture where he hoped to expand the herd of cattle. He explained the work involved, the risks of harsh weather, and the rewards that patience and care could bring. Clara listened carefully, asking questions and offering thoughtful suggestions. He realized that she was not only a partner in heart, but also in mind and action. One afternoon, as they repaired a broken fence, John paused and looked at Clara, feeling a wave of emotion he could no longer suppress. She was lifting a heavy plank into place, her hair falling into her face, and he saw in her the same determination he had admired for so many years. He walked over, brushing the hair from her face gently, and their eyes met. "Clara," he said, his voice low and steady. "There's something I've been meaning to say for a very long time." She looked at him, a mixture of curiosity and anticipation in her eyes. "What is it?" He took her hands in his, feeling the warmth and strength in them. "I love you," he said simply. "I have for 18 years and nothing, no distance, no time, no obstacles has changed that. You are my home, Clara, you always have been." For a moment, Clara did not speak. Then slowly a smile spread across her face and tears filled her eyes. "John, I love you too," she whispered. "I always have. Even when I thought I'd lost you, I never stopped loving you. You are my home as well." The moment was quiet but powerful. The wind rustled through the trees, the animals stirred in the distance, and the sun shone warmly on them as if blessing their words. They stood together, hands intertwined, hearts beating in unison, and for the first time in nearly 2 decades they felt completely whole. Life on the ranch continued, but now every task, every chore carried a deeper meaning. Plowing the fields, mending fences, and feeding the animals were no longer just work. They were acts shared together, moments of cooperation and trust. They laughed when mistakes happened, comforted each other when frustrations arose, and celebrated small victories with joy. The ranch became a place where love was nurtured alongside the land, and the years of waiting and longing felt worthwhile. One sunny morning, John led Clara to the hill behind the cabin. From there they could see the entire ranch, the river winding through the valley, the distant mountains rising like silent guardians. The view was breathtaking. "This is ours," John said quietly. "All of it. Every acre, every tree, every corner, it's ours to care for together." Clara looked out over the land, feeling a deep sense of peace and belonging. "It's beautiful," she said, "but not just the land, it's us, what we've built together even after all the years apart." "That's what's truly beautiful," John smiled, brushing her hand gently. "We've been given a second chance," he said. "A chance to start again not as we were but as we are now, and I don't intend to waste a single moment." Spring turned to summer and the ranch thrived under their combined care. Crops grew tall, cattle flourished, and the cabin seemed to glow with warmth and laughter. Neighbors stopped by occasionally, bringing news, supplies, and small gifts. Clara welcomed them with a quiet confidence, and John watched with pride as she navigated social interactions with grace and ease. Their evenings were often spent outside, sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, and talking quietly about their dreams. They spoke of children, of expanding the ranch, of traveling to nearby towns, and of all the little joys that life could offer. The trust and understanding they had rebuilt over the previous months now formed the foundation for a future filled with hope and shared purpose. One evening, as the sky turned shades of orange and pink, John pulled out a small, worn box from under the porch railing. Inside were the letters he had kept for all those years, the letters Clara had written him, filled with hopes, stories, and small details of her life. "I kept these," he said softly, opening the first envelope and handing it to her. "Every word, every page. They reminded me of you when I needed it most." Clara's eyes filled with tears as she read through them again, reliving memories and realizing the depth of his devotion. "I can't believe you held on to these," she whispered. It shows how much you truly cared." "I did," John replied. "And now we can write new letters, new memories together, not just in words, but in our lives in every day we share." The days and weeks passed, marked by hard work, quiet evenings, and shared laughter. They learned to anticipate each other's needs, to respect each other's space, and to celebrate the small moments of life. Their bond grew stronger with every sunrise, every chore completed together, and every shared meal. They were partners in the truest sense, their love no longer just a memory or a hope, but a living, breathing part of their daily existence. One late afternoon, as they worked together to repair a section of fence damaged by the summer winds, Clara paused and looked at John. "You know," she said, smiling, "I think we've built something stronger than either of us could have imagined, not just the ranch, but us." John stopped, resting his hands on the rail beside hers. "I know," he said. "We've been through waiting, separation, and uncertainty, but every step brought us here, and now nothing can break what we have." Clara leaned slightly against him, feeling his strength and comfort. "I think this is the life I was always meant to live," she said softly. "Here with you in this place, everything else, it just led me to this moment." John wrapped an arm around her shoulders, holding her close. "And I was meant to wait," he said, "to wait for you. Every day, every year, it was all worth it." As the sun dipped behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows over the plains, John and Clara stood together on the porch, looking out at the land they had nurtured and the life they had built. The wind whispered softly through the trees, carrying the scent of wildflowers and fresh earth. In that moment, they understood that the trials of the past had made their love stronger, their bond unbreakable, and their future full of promise. They no longer needed letters, distant dreams, or memories to keep them connected. They had each other. They had a home. And they had the promise of every tomorrow to face together side by side. The mail-order bride who had arrived on that frosty February morning was no longer just a stranger to John McAllister. She was Clara, the girl he had loved for 18 years, now a woman who shared his life, his work, and his heart. The years of longing, waiting, and hope had finally led to this, a new beginning, filled with love, trust, and the quiet joy of finding home in another person. As night fell over the plains, stars twinkling like distant fires, John and Clara sat together on the porch, hands intertwined, hearts aligned. The ranch was peaceful, the animals settled, and the wind carried only the soft sounds of life continuing in harmony. For the first time in years, John felt truly complete. Clara's presence, her love, and their shared life had brought him the happiness he had longed for, and he knew that together they could face anything the future held. And so, under the vast expanse of the Wyoming sky, surrounded by the land they loved, John and Clara began their life anew. A life built on patience, resilience, and a love that had endured 18 years, unbroken and triumphant.